Welcome back to the Brahmin Word, and we are continuing to walk through the creation accounts. And today we are going to be taking a look at day 5. And day 5 is really, really cool because we are going to the seas and to the air, where we see the creation of birds and of sea living creatures. And I'll explain why I don't say fish there in a second. But we are going to take a look at that today. We're also going to take a look at the word kind or kinds and why that is a very interesting word, but one that we really want to get a look at. And then finally, just to break a pattern from the days before that God does with the fifth day. So let's take a look at that. So we are going to be in Genesis chapter 1, verses 20 through 23 today. So let us go ahead and take a look at verse 20 first. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." And then verse 21. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. All right, so you have a couple things going on here first. You have the pattern of in the days of creation that we've seen before, where God is saying something and then whatever is being said, and then it usually follows up with a phrase, and it was so. But on the fifth day, we do not see that phrase, and it was so, because it really should be at the start of verse 21 or at the end of verse 20, but it's not there. So it's a break of pattern. And I think the reason why, though, is because there is for the first time in the creation account, a blessing that God gives to something that he has created on that specific day, as we see in verse 22, which we'll take a look at in a second. You still have the phrase, "and God saw that it was good," but we just don't see that phrase, "and it was so," which, as a reader of scripture, should make me go, something's different there. So I just wanted to point that out, and hopefully you saw that as well. And I think that's really something interesting, which gets into verse 22, which again we'll get to in a second. But you have these waters that swarm together, and out of the swarms come living creatures that live in the water. Now, the water itself doesn't create the living creatures within the water. God creates, he is the only one that creates the living creatures in the water, but he makes them come out of these swarms, which I'm not saying this is how it was because I wasn't there. But it would be really cool if it was like giant waves and they come together, and out of the giant waves come sharks and fish and dolphins and whales. I think that would be really, really cool to see. Now, before we get to the birds, I do want to make a quick note. The reason why I didn't say fish and I said just sea living creatures is because of verse 21. Verse 21. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds. I think the end of verse 21, the every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, I think that is probably the thing that is being thought of when it comes to fish. But the great sea creatures phrase there in verse 21 is incredibly interesting and fascinating. What could that be referencing to? I think it is referencing to your just ancient ancestors of dolphins and sharks and whales. I think that's probably what is being referenced to as great sea creatures. Because if you're in the time of Israel, where after after the events of Exodus, which again, if you believe that the first 5 books were written by Moses, that's the timing that would be in. Uh, you would see whales and sharks and dolphins as great sea creatures. Now, I do want to put in there, you could also throw in water living dinosaurs, would be really, really cool to throw in there as well in verse 21. I think that would be awesome. Loch Ness Monster, maybe. But I think that would be really cool. But I just wanted to just show that little bit of phrasing there with great sea creatures. I don't think we really take much into account with our look at the creation account before, maybe. And I just wanted to bring that to the table today and just think how cool that is to see that whether it be whales or great sea monsters, are seen as different from fish, just from the scale and the creativity and organization that God brings to the table, which is clearly seen throughout creation account, but really seen in days 5 and 6 because of the word kinds. Now, of course, you still have the birds being created as well. They are the ones that are flying above the earth across the expanse of the heavens, which going back to day 2, we remember is the creation of the sky and the atmosphere. So that's kind of where we get at with birds there. But now it goes back to the word kind. All right, so the word kind is really, really interesting because it's not just mentioned here. It's also very, very relevant when it comes to the flood account in later on in the book of Genesis in chapters 6 and 7. So it's incredibly important or really fascinating that it shows up here in Genesis chapter 1. But what could the word kind mean? Well, let's first look at how we classify animals today. So we see a 7-tier system of classification of animals today. And that is kingdom, phylum, class, order, family. Sometimes people would say genus or group, and then species. So that's how we classify animals today. Now, of course, that classification system was not around when the book of Genesis was originally written, whether that is by Moses or by somebody else. It still was not around at that time. So we can't use our classification system to go, okay, kind means phylum, or it means species or family. But I think it is interesting to at least take a look at the context itself in verses 20 through 23 of Genesis chapter 1. So you have the kinds being split up between the animals that live in the sea and then the birds in the air. So for me, I think very, very specific classifications like species or very general classifications like kingdom or phylum are probably not what is being talked about here. Phylum, by the way, is just, are you a vertebrate or are you a invertebrate? That is what phylum means. So for me, I think it probably boils down to one or two things. Most likely, probably class, where we see vertebrates split up into 5 main classes: mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. So I think that is absolutely on the table when it comes to Genesis chapter 1. I think order could be a little bit of a possibility as well when you get into, let's say, for instance, with us for human beings, we go into under the primate section after the class of Mammalia. So for me, I think it could be either class or order, which just gives us kind of okay, here's how we would classify it in today's language. But again, knowing that this is not, that classification system was not available in the writing of Genesis, I believe it is just a way to separate the different animals and make sure that they could produce and multiply and fulfill the earth. I think that is the purpose of kind or kinds and what that word means. Now, with that being said, that's where we get to the blessing. And this is the first time that God blesses something that he has created on a specific day. So let's go to verses 22 and 23 to wrap up. And God blessed them, saying, that them being the sea creatures and the birds, by the way, saying, "Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. So you have your repeated structure of, and God saw that it was good at the end of verse 21, and then in verse 23, and there was evening and there was morning the fifth day. But out of that pattern, you see verse 22 and God blessing the thing that he has created on that day. But not just blessing it, but giving it a purpose. And the big purpose that we see here is be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the sea and let birds multiply on the earth. That's the purpose. That's the mission of those things that were created on day 5. What this just goes to show is that that the reproductive cycle, that is incredibly good. That was created by God. Yes, it was sadly very much crushed, or not crushed, but very twisted after the fall in Genesis chapter 3. But the reproductive cycle is absolutely a God-given thing that he gave at the beginning of creation, as we see in day 5 and continue to see in day 6, not just with animals that live on the earth, but then with human beings as well, as we'll talk about later. But I think it just goes to show just how incredibly creative and how incredibly organized our God is as creator, to the point where he is showing that reproduction itself is incredibly good, and really really cool to see that here in Genesis chapter 1. So thanks for spending a little bit of time with me today as we got to see some of the things that are swimming in our oceans, and then the things that are flying in the air, and just how incredibly and specifically they were created and they were organized. Just a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. So with that being said, we will go to the creation of land animals on Thursday as we start day 6. Not finish it, but start day 6. So we will head there on Thursday. But thanks for spending a little bit of time with me today. I will see you on Thursday. Thanks.